Okay.
We are thrilled to have Sharon O'Hara here as our substitute guest host for tonight. Dr. Rob is traveling, and so Sharon O'Hara has graciously agreed to fill the spot, and we're looking at possibly having her as an ongoing webinar host. So there may be more from Sharon. So I'm Sharon. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and then for those of you that are joining us live, we really appreciate it. We'd love to have you. If you've got questions, if you're here, you probably have questions about sex addiction, or as a partner, as someone who's struggling with it, or is in early recovery, whatever the case may be. We invite you to ask your questions. So Sharon, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I'm Sharon O'Hara, licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm certified a sex addiction therapist. And also, I also have certification to treat nonviolent offenders. So people who have most of my people looked at internet, they looked at some kind of porn that was illegal. That's mostly what I specialize in as far as that's concerned. But I've known Rob Weiss for 28 years and worked with him in the Del Amo Hospital. That Pat Carnes was at Del Amo Hospital. And then also I worked for him when the Sexual Recovery Institute was operating in 2009 to 2015. And now I'm a consultant for Seeking Integrity, and I help train some of the therapists there. So other things in my background is some trauma training. I am trained in somatic experiencing and something called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So I'm glad to be here. I always think that it takes great courage for people to show up and ask questions and to seek help. So I'm open to whatever anybody wants to ask.
Since we don't have any questions, I would like you to talk a little bit about your work with the trauma. You know, you have two different modalities, and can you compare and contrast perhaps a little bit? Because, you know, we use terms like EMDR and somatic experience, but what does that mean for a client?
Okay. Well, I think of EMDR, it's when you get trained to have somebody's eyes go back and forth around a problem, and it's been discovered that if you do that in a specific kind of way, according to a certain method, that it can often help people to, new insights will form, and often some kind of trauma will resolve itself. But it is a little bit of a power tool, EMDR. And I like somatic experiencing because somatic experiencing is focusing on getting grounded. So we might even do some of that here, but it's about like, can I feel my feet on the floor? Can I feel my butt in the chair? Getting into your body. And then when something happens, like, okay, what's happening in your body right now? And so there's a lot about settling. And often when you do some exercises around settling, then your brain will clear up and you'll get a new perspective on things. So I like to use these together, actually.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But in a nutshell, that's a little bit of the differences.
Yeah, that's actually really helpful to understand too. And, you know, because I was thinking when you were talking about the body reaction, you know, like, you know, I've witnessed, I'm sure it happens with me too, but I've witnessed in other people when they're having, you know, some sort of reaction, and it's like deer in the headlights. They're like, you can see they're completely detached. And I thought, you know, settling into the body probably, you know, would help you settle in and be able to refocus. Because I mean, this person we couldn't make a decision.
You're remembering the trauma. If you can get back in the chair right here, right now, often that can help with that kind of panicky feeling.
Yeah.
You know.
That's helpful. Okay, so we have a question. It says, two questions, somewhat related. I don't have much experience in normal dating and sex life. My only sexual experience is from porn, and physical experience is with escorts. Is there such a thing as healthy porn for an SLA to watch that is not a porn addict? So what are your thoughts on that?
Okay. Well, right off the bat, I have to say, the biggest problem I have with porn is that it is a terrible sex education. It's a terrible way to have sex education, because porn, you know, was developed as a fantasy thing primarily aimed at men who, to be like how I would like the world to be. So for example, it would be great if in my fantasy, you know, I can imagine being in a hotel room and a very attractive woman just knocks on the door and decides to, I open the door and she wants to come in and be sexual with me. And then I can, you know, she does everything I want her to do, or he, you know, this is the same, gay or straight. And so it was basically set up to be fantasy related and wish fulfillment, but nothing having to do with real people. And so people would have 40 orgasms and they would, you know, do this and that and the other thing. And it was meant to be, originally it was meant to be a way for the people who are producing porn to make money. And I think it must still be, you know, in whatever ways you can make money on the internet, but it's a fantasy wish fulfillment strategy. It's not about how to actually be sexual in any kind of healthy way with somebody else. The problem with porn is there's very little healthy sex in it, is what I would say. Let me see.
Well, and so here's my take on it too. It's like you're talking about, I don't have very much experience in normal dating and sex life. And my concern is porn is going to keep you from having a normal dating and sex life. You know, it's like that'll still be the escape hatch over here. I can go numb out, I can go do that, I can masturbate, whatever, but I'm still not having an attached relationship with another human being. And so the fantasy that Sharon is talking about, it's still, I'm living in the fantasy and I'm still not making myself vulnerable and going and meeting a live person. So a little bit of it for me is like, what is your goal with doing this? And how is that going to help you have a normal dating and sex life?
Right. I know that there are videos somewhere on people who, you know, how you can have healthy sexuality together or something like that have been used by sex therapists to try to introduce people to some kinds of sexuality. Those are best used, I think, within a therapeutic relationship with people who are specializing in that, you know, but you know, in terms of what you might call healthy porn, see the problem with, that's why I really like that video, Your Brain on Porn, that's on YouTube. And it talks about, usually when you are looking at porn, you always want to look at newer and newer things. You want novelty. And what happens is although it causes these dopamine spikes. And then you want more and more and more and newer and maybe more porn that is weird or odd or involves animals or, you know, various other kind of weird things. And the next thing you can look at some illegal stuff and then you end up in trouble like some of my clients. But I just think that it tends to take you away from growing so that you could have a relationship, a healthy relationship. You get very porn dependent. And that's what you really are talking about is maybe how can you learn better communication skills, or how can you learn to relate to people? How could you be with, if you're heterosexual, how could you be with a woman, be a friend, and then get to know that person as a human being and not just sexually, and then move towards, okay, is there somebody I'm attracted to, and how, you know, how might I let them know that? They're just sort of early dating skills. And sometimes people need to go back and learn some of those.
So the next question is, I'm a newly admitted porn addict. My wife and I used to flirt with one another, sexting and sharing pics and sexy memes. Obviously, this ended when my wife discovered my acting out with other women. What are your thoughts on how I can introduce this again and in a way that she would be comfortable?
Well, you really messed up. You know, you crossed boundaries. And when you cross those kinds of boundaries, you cannot come easily back over that line. So this is all about trust. And the reason she could do these things with you when you flirt with one another and share these things is she trusted you. She trusted you that you were doing this in the service of your own sexuality with each other, and you blew that. So I think you need to really work on regaining that trust. And I think finding out from, from your wife, what does she need from you to feel like, that maybe she needs you to stay away from these things and get to know her as a person and show her that you are interested in being sexual with her, and rebuilding that relationship, and really taking time out from, even in fantasy, bringing in other people for the moment, because, that led you to go act out. Why wouldn't she think that that would continue to lead you to go act out with other people?
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, she may never be okay with you doing that. That doesn't mean you can't find new and different ways to connect with each other. And you don't, yeah, it says newly admitted porn addict. So here's another challenge. You're newly admitted. And so she is just in the early stages of dealing with all of this and the trauma of the discovery, et cetera. And a porn addict, you identify as a porn addict, but if you're flirting and sexting with other people, that to me is more than just a porn addict, because you are now interacting with other live people. And so,
right. So you're being unfaithful.
Yeah. So she gets to say, what's going to make her feel safe. And it's a challenge. It's a path, and it's not going to be, in the next 3 weeks or even 3 months. I mean, Dr. Rob has talked on this forum before that there are, it's a time frame. It could be 18 months, before she's really, feeling with you doing everything right. Dr. Rob wrote a book. I should have grabbed it. Out of the Doghouse. Yes. Yeah. And it really is a great book on how to rebuild trust. It's very practical. Do these things, don't do these things. And, that might be a really good place for you to start with, just rebuilding trust. But looking for it to go back to the way it was before, not happening, and it will be different for both of you. That doesn't mean that there won't be love and, connection and everything else, but, in a different way. So.
Okay.
The next question, for me, raised super conservatively, and I was in college during the height of the AIDS crisis. Sex with real people was forbidden, and it was very dangerous because of AIDS and STDs. So masturbation and then porn was the only option, certainly the safer one. How do you process that?
Well, I think first of all, you have to learn about sexuality and about condoms and about how to be, how to have safer sex. I think, you need to learn more about your body and healthy sexuality. And, I don't know, sex with real people was forbidden. That seems extreme.
Well, but if you think about it, he was raised in a super conservative environment and at the height of the AIDS crisis. So right. That actually makes 100% sense to me. And, I'm almost thinking, there's a level of, trauma associated with even thinking about that, and I don't know, but I wonder if some degree of, trauma therapy to.
Yeah. Let me just say this. As I now am reading over the question, I can understand why masturbation and porn felt like the only option. It certainly felt like a safer option. So I just want to say that makes a lot of sense. But so often in our lives, we come up with a solution to handle a problem, and then the solution becomes the real problem.
Yeah.
So now you're addicted to porn, and which usually means you're used to these dopamine spikes, that novelty and new images and new activities and all that, which real life can't match. And so, but you lose your practice with relationship skills, and particularly sexual relationship skills. So this is an example of a solution that has now backfired. It's now turned on you. So not to criticize you for having turned to it, it makes sense. I agree with you, Tammy. It makes sense why you turned to it in the first place, but it is now been overused as a coping skill. I think that's an important thing to forgive yourself for having turned to it. It makes all that sense, but you've overused it as a coping skill. And I think you have to be gentle with yourself and realize that I need some more, I need some more coping skills that I can practice. And it's going to be weaning yourself away from your dependence on porn. One thing I tell people is, if masturbation is your outlet, try masturbating with no porn. That is a possibility. It tends to not be as addictive as masturbation to porn. So sometimes that can be a part of trying to be with your sexuality in some different ways.
And I would invite you to my sense is, you're in a very conservative environment growing up, and it was different, or you felt different or whatever. But I can't help but think of how isolating that is, not just sexually, but probably kind of across the board. And so learning to connect with people in a non-sexual way, like Sharon was talking about, a minute ago, learning to connect in a non-sexual way, and then, exploring that. But not only the dopamine rush, but just the isolation. Because my experience is that porn and masturbation is fantasy, dopamine, but also isolating. Most of the time people aren't really connected to real people. Like the first person said, I don't have dating experience. So now you're fast forwarded, you're a little bit older than you would have been if you were trying to do this at 16, but you're kind of like going, oh my goodness, now I've got to start learning how to do all this. But you got to start somewhere, on some level. It's like, and it can be a massive fail on some levels, but it's still data and it's still good, experience. So, and it can be stuff that you look back on and laugh at that particular date or whatever, so if you can not take yourself too seriously, be willing to dip your toe in, I'm going to reach out and I'm going to try to connect with people,
Right. And this is also where you can get involved in other activities, where you get to know women as people. So it's not just a dating situation where there's so much judgment immediately. What do you look like? Where do you look like? Are you in my inbox or my outbox or whatever this swiping thing is? So I think that if you can work on a project together, I don't know, a charitable project, political project, Save the Whales project, anything, then you can actually grow your relationship skills.
Yeah, and I think whether you're straight or gay, learning relationship skills with other people, like you said, my closest experience to this is when I got divorced. I was like, oh, I'm way out of the loop with all of this stuff. And I thought, I'm going to go do the things that I'm interested in doing. And I'm going to meet people who are, have some similar interests, and whether I dated anybody or not was irrelevant. And I met some great people, male and female, and then, eventually, they know people and whatever, but it was a great place to start, of just like, I'm interested in, like you said, Save the Whales. I'm going to go to the Save the Whales group. Great. There's these other people, and I might go, well, this one I like, and this is a nice person, and I'm going to have coffee with them one morning. Well, that's great relationship skills, regardless of dating and sexuality. It's just like, go have coffee with somebody. So would encourage you to broaden your horizons and be willing, and if it's at the end of the day, if it's a massive fail, it usually takes two people to have it be a massive fail, and it still ends up being a funny anecdote for later. I have some of those.
That's what we have here.
Okay, so here's the next one. I experienced a lot of emotional trauma and manipulation in my marriage, and I acted out my pain by being really promiscuous with lots of men. I'm a woman. I'm 9 months in recovery and single now. I feel it is so hard to trust and be vulnerable. I'm starting to identify with the anorexic side of SLA. How do I move through this? And she said the promiscuity happened after the marriage ended. So it was,
Okay.
Okay. So how do I not, how do I just not date to not deal with anything?
Well, Again, I want to say something first that I want to address the idea that it sounds to me like there was a lot of feeling, being victimized, emotional trauma and manipulation. And my heart goes out to you in terms of, having to go through all that pain. And sometimes in an effort not to be a woman who is victimized, it's sort of like we move like, okay, I'm going to go do what I want. There was something actually daring and brave in going out there and deciding I'm going to have the freedom that a man has, to go out and sleep with people and do stuff. And I understand the impulse, and I think it's actually a brave impulse. But just like with the person we were talking about before, sometimes the solution then becomes the problem, you know? And so you can find yourself in sort of a series of empty relationships or, just in another situation where this isn't going the way you want and it might feel kind of empty. But not to shame yourself or not to think of yourself as being a bad person, but just that was a strategy maybe to get out of a bad situation and maybe also go feel your oats and see what was out there. And now you're at a place where, as a solution for my life, this isn't working either. So I think you're really making progress is how I would see it. Because in my view, I often say there's only one prayer that I know that's ever worked for me, and that's, what would you have me learn from this? Whether it's God or universe or whatever, it's like there's always a lesson embedded in even our worst mistakes. I wish I were constructed so that I could learn only from joy, but I personally learn from pain. So I learn a lot when my life falls apart. And I imagine this is the same for you. And I think that you said you might identify with anorexia side of sex and love addicts. Taking a break from sexuality is not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think you have to necessarily label that as anorexic. You could be taking a break. And it might be a good time to really be in therapy or to go to some workshops or just take a time out from sexuality and relationships and kind of, you've tried this, you've tried that, to allow yourself some time to find out what is it you really want? What is it you really need? And allow that to come to you.
And I agree. And, I think it's a pretty normal and healthy reaction to, to have it be, I'm going to take this freedom. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. I'm going to go experience life. And, especially if you've been manipulated and traumatized and, contained within this marriage, then to go, woohoo, that makes 100%, sense. And I love what you said, Sharon, about, taking a break. I think that's a great way to look at it. I had said a little bit ago, it's information, it's data. And I feel like that's where you're at. It's like, well, that wasn't, that was fun, but, that wasn't really what I want. And what I wanted, I want to look at something different moving forward. So all of that is good information and good data. Like you were saying too, Sharon, about what lesson am I learning from this? I think you've learned a lot. You continue with, what are your thoughts on setting good boundaries around online dating sites for sex and love addicts? Not the hookup apps, but the ones like eHarmony where people are really looking for relationships.
I also wanted to mention, there's a book by Linda Hatch, which is on dating and relationships for recovering sex addicts. I forget the title of it, but it's by a psychologist named Linda Hatch, Hatch. And it's, I thought they had some useful things because it's specifically on dating in recovering relationships. And so that's a resource you might want to check out. I'm sure it's on Amazon. Let's see, what are your thoughts on setting good boundaries? I'm trying to squint and read this thing. Knock the hookup apps. Yeah, I think it's great that, what are your thoughts on setting good boundaries? Of course, you're going to need to set good boundaries. So there are things like on even dating apps, you want to be safe. There are some people out there who aren't particularly safe. So the basic kinds of boundaries, such as maybe meet for coffee someplace, public place, you know, all those things about not inviting somebody to your home right away. And
there's a recovery app, a dating app too. I'm trying to think. I'm looking for it. I met one of the guys that created it, and I was like, that's a brilliant.
yeah.
Cassie. Let's see if I can find it.
Okay, let me just also say that I think that, again, really giving yourself time, for people who've been involved in kinds of addictive behaviors, you know, so having some boundaries, like I've heard different numbers, but sometimes it's 10 dates before you are sexual, even if you want to be sexual. Some people have 6 dates. Whatever it is for you, I always say, but all those dates can't happen in just one weekend. I had somebody say, okay, Sharon, I'm going to do breakfast, lunch, dinner, breakfast, lunch, 6 dates.
Yeah.
The weekend, I've covered that.
That's such a good addict strategy, isn't it? It's like,
yes. So
I can do that.
I do think it's also okay to have a sense of humor about yourself and about some of these messes we get ourselves into. But it's always about slowing things down, taking your time, getting to know somebody, because sometimes you can get to know somebody and you can already kind of see where this is going, and maybe you didn't have to be sexual with them to discover that this is not somebody you really want to be sexual with. It's about valuing yourself enough. And I think with other people, because I've had people say, well, Sharon, nobody wants to date me for 10 dates or even 6 dates. You know, they're like, what's wrong with you? And you don't want to have sex on the second date or the third date or something. And you could say, and I really like you, and I've made some mistakes in the past, and you know what, you're worth it to me to take time with. So you turn it into a compliment is, I think, a useful thing to do.
I love that idea. And you know, I want time for both of us, you know, and I think, I think that there's real value. Like we've talked on the webinar before too about, you know, people who have struggled through infidelity, going back to, you know, initial dating, and it's, you know, going for a walk, holding hands. It's all of those things that are not just, you know, the intimacy of being next to you and talking to you is different than the intimacy of, you know, jumping in bed. So, you know, I think it's a great strategy. I did put in the chat feature, the CASL. I don't remember what that stands for, but, he did create a dating app for those in recovery. I haven't been on it. I'm not in dating, but, you know, I think, memberships, they said, this was a year ago already, or whatever. No, it was earlier this year. Almost 10,000 people in the U.S. So they are apparently valid. They are apparently, you know, continuing. So I suspect it's a decent site, but, you know, feel free to check it out. I'm not endorsing it. I'm just sharing a resource, but feel free to check it out. I'm sure there's ratings on the app, you know, on your app store too. So, but that might be an option. So any other questions, thoughts, comments? I did put Linda Hatch's book. It's called Relationships in Recovery, and I put that information in there. There was a comment in the chat. This is from another of our participants, and she said, you know, for the woman who's divorced, she gets the privilege of relearning who she is and finding her own personal strength. Take a break from dating is a really good thing that helps us know who we are. So, you know, so there's some affirmation from one of our other participants. So questions, thoughts, comments? Sharon and I can talk, believe me. So.
This is true. It takes a lot of courage to ask a question.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to ask you about, because one of our colleagues was raving about one of your presentations, and I was thinking that could possibly be a webinar topic. So it's rebuilding intimacy was one of the topics, but you have a whole workbook and it's escaping me. I should have had a note here, but tell me about it.
I'm not sure.
She said you did a lecture on
Live Love.
What is it?
There's a lecture that I do called Live Love.
Yes. Tell me more.
Well, it's kind of a performance art piece.
Okay. Okay.
And where the idea is that we all walk around with a jar. And I've done this lecture, I think a long time ago at some kind of ITAP conference or something like this, I believe, but a long time ago.
Okay.
And, but anyway, it's almost like we're all walking around with our jar of shame and guilt. So here I am with my jar of shame and guilt. It's every awful thing I've ever done or every awful thing that ever happened to me. And if I'm an addict, you know, how much shame and guilt do I have compared to the ordinary person?
A lot.
A lot. So, but here I am, it's my secret jar of shame and guilt. But what happens when I fall in love with somebody, this is the kind of fall in love where I'm in love with you and you're in love with me. And so it's like, oh my God, you really want to be with me. You really, and what really happens is the person you fall in love with effectively becomes a lid on your jar of shame and guilt.
Interesting.
And the reason you feel so lighter than air, the reason you feel so wonderful is for those moments you're with that person who's seeing you as wonderful and I love you, is you're not in touch with that shame and guilt. They've become a lid on your jar. And when you think about how painful that is, all that stuff that ever happened to you or the, you know, things you don't ever want to think about, it's like, no wonder you're floating. And, you know, people who are gifted musicians write songs about this.
Mm-hmm.
And all of our music, all of our culture, you know, it runs on and this is what I call limerence.
Yes.
And I got this word from a woman named Dorothy Tenov, who wrote a book about limerence. And I like the word because limerence is a glittery word. And so the lecture goes on with, to understand that there's chemicals, real life chemicals in limerence, and it's dopamines and oxytocin and vasopressin and anyway, there's a whole cocktail in human limerence. Scientists are now getting grants to study this. And it's released in your brain and you get addicted to your own brain chemistry, you know, when you fall in love. And then what happens over time is, you know, maybe this person who was calling you and texting you once an hour, one day goes by and they don't call, they don't text, and you're like, that lid is feeling loose. And I want to get that lid on tight. And I start saying, what's wrong? How come you aren't doing that? And they experience that as criticism. And by the way, they have their own jar. They have their own jar of guilt and shame. And I become the lid on their jar. See? And so then the next thing we do is we start criticizing one another. And it's like, well, if you really loved me, you'd pick your towels up off the floor. And you're, well, if you really loved me, you wouldn't be on my case all the time. And we do this back and forth thing. And then sooner or later, the guilt and shame keeps building up with all this mutual criticism, and the lid flies off, meaning the person leaves me. Now I'm an overflowing jar of guilt and shame. And then sometimes I come up with strategies for new lids, such as a bunch of imaginary porn lids.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of other things that go on in this. And then it moves on to how could I transform this kind of, I call this lid love. It's basically having this idea that romantic love and becoming a lid for somebody else is what love really is. And it goes back to this book, The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck, which is about growing and transforming lid love into something that we could call real love. Anyway, in a nutshell, that's the talk.
Oh, that's interesting stuff. So, and I put a little bit more limerence I put in there. So if you haven't been familiar with that term, it's come up in webinars occasionally, and there are people who are very, I want to say addicted to the limerence, you know, and
yes,
like you said,
addicts are addicted to the high of limerence.
Yeah, yeah. And
it's an altered state.
Yes. And then when it gets boring and normal, it's on to the next. So.
Right. You start criticizing typically. You do this, you know.
Other questions, comments? So while we're here, oh, we've got a question. Yes, yeah. So I think porn will have to be a deal breaker for me, whatever I start dating. And that's fair. That's a great boundary, you know, and, you know, I think that that's really fair. I think we all need to understand so after my not pleasant divorce, then before I started dating, I had a list, and my list was, if I never dated another person, you know, or got involved with anybody, you know, okay. But if I did, I had a very short list, but it was deal breakers. And, you know, if I did, he would be this, and this, and he wouldn't be this, and this. One of my things is smokers. I can't handle that. You know, I don't like the smell. I don't like the whatever. And so, like, if he'd been the greatest guy in the world and he was a smoker, that would have been a deal breaker for me. And, you know, the other things were, you know, it was pretty basic. I didn't have the long list, and it really wasn't physical attributes. It was like active, because I'm pretty active. And so, like, if it had been a complete couch potato, he had been a complete couch potato, that wouldn't be a good fit. But it was that kind of things. But I think it's really fair, and I think it's really important actually to have your list of, you know, this. And then Dr. Roberts talked about having a posse, having people around you that as you start dating, because it's really easy to fall into the limerence and go, oh my gosh, this person is fantastic, even though they're shooting up heroin, you know, well, you know, or they're watching porn. Well, they're so wonderful, I'm sure they'll stop using it. No, you know, like really having people around you that support you and can see things with a different lens than with the, you know, the starry eyes.
I want to add something to that, which is this is a slightly different thing, but I really honestly think, and it's going to sound weird to start with, but I think in terms of starting dating, before you start dating, I really think some effort, I like this posse idea. And I also think that it is a mistake to start dating if you don't have the ability to make friendships with women. If you're
Yes.
you're a woman, you need to maybe try your relationship skills, develop them with other women. And sometimes you can do that by being in a 12-step group, a partners group, or any other kind of friend group, you know, whether it's bridge or mahjong or what. But, you know, out of that group of people that you interact with, you could probably have one or two closer friends that you can kind of trust to tell some secrets to, or to, you know, talk about things that are really very personal for you. But I personally think it's very hard to have a successful relationship with, you know, a romantic relationship if you don't have also these friendship skills, and put some effort into, you know, working on your trust issues in terms of friends, like how to get along with people, or what do you do when somebody, you know, disappoints you or says they'll do something and then they don't follow through on it. And can you confront that in a healthy way? Can you recover from that? You know, learning some of those skills with people that you are not necessarily involved with romantically, because then you'll be more able to do that in a romantic situation, as opposed to, you know, as soon as somebody gets on your nerves, it's like, you're out of there. Because a lot of successful relationships is about learning how to have more emotional balance within yourself, and learning, you know, forgiveness and acceptance and getting over things. I think those are really important too.
I think I love what you said. And it was a little bit like we talked about with the Save the Whales or whatever, going and making connections with other human beings, regardless of male or female, or, you know, potential dating partner or not, you know, just making those connections and getting more connected to people. And then it also takes the intensity off of like looking for someone to date, you know, because I've got more of a social sphere. I've got more, my life is fuller. And so that would be great, but it isn't like, you know, I have to go find it, or I'm going to completely avoid it. The comment is, but porn is a societal problem affecting so many people. And that's true on a lot of levels, but like alcohol, I mean, like there's a lot of people who have a, an issue with alcoholism, but not everybody who drinks does. And there are people that watch porn and, and the definition of what porn is and all of that. So, we obviously take a hard line with underage kids. That's a huge issue. And, when it's problematic for, if you're here because porn has affected your life, you're in the right place, and we want to help. But there's lots of people who don't, that aren't hooked on porn, or just or if it was important to you not to, they'd go, okay, it's not that big of a deal, and I'd rather be with you than look at porn. So.
Right. And if you meet somebody and you're talking to them about porn or their history of porn, I mean, the fact that they may have looked at some porn, it's hard to grow up these days and not have some experience of porn. I think what you want to know is where on the continuum that person is, and how they've used porn and what is the reliance on it. Now, people will probably be hesitant to tell you the truth about that, but, I just don't think things should be all or nothing. And I think, you want to work with people about what do they really want. And you could share your own experience that in relationships with people where porn is a necessary part of their day, you just say that hasn't worked for me. And maybe the person would be inspired to let their porn go or something else. So I just, I think that it is very difficult to be in relationship with somebody where porn is their major coping skill. But, I also think just getting to know other people as a human being and accepting, okay, maybe they're not right person for you right now, but I just like the idea of every human has something about them that you could honor or that you could give them compliments on. And to see this less as black and white, are you in my inbox or my outbox, and kind of learning to live in the grays is a lot of what I like to talk to people about.
Yeah, and just because they're not like if that's a deal breaker from a relationship standpoint, doesn't mean that they can't be your friend, and you can go to a movie with them, whatever. I don't know. But
maybe they'd be up for transformation, or maybe there's some other ways that that person might be interesting to you.
Yeah.
I remember somebody said, this just came into my head too. Somebody said that it's helpful to look at everybody you meet as being either a lover or a teacher. Mm. And the word lover is not at all sexual person, but that if you're walking through your day and the Starbucks person smiles at you, then you're having positive energy. That's love from the agape meaning of the word love. You're having a positive experience, or you're at the checkout counter and, you just say something that's a really pretty blue color on you, and they smile. It could be an older woman, and I say that too, and they just light up, and that's called a lover. Now, another one could be like some other person, they drop your stuff, or they, growl at you or something. That's a teacher. Teachers are always the people who drive you crazy. So, and this person I remember who used to talk to me about this was forever telling me that I needed to really pay attention, about to see everybody that I thought like I want to get them out of my life, to see them as teachers. Now, often I would say, I don't know what they're teaching.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to get out of knowing this person? And sometimes the thing they were teaching was, I need to let that person go, and when I was younger, I had a hard time letting people go. So, but thinking of people as, is this a positive, or, every interaction is either a lover or teacher. And I just thought that was a really useful way to think of people. And I think dating, I would think of them the same way. So I just want to put that out there as a kind of a way of moving through your world, and also looking for something positive in everybody in some way. It doesn't mean that you necessarily want to date them or have sex with them, but there can be some connections with just about anybody.
Yeah, and I think of the teachers, and you know, a lot of it. I'm not a patient person. This is a surprise to no one who has been on this forum before. But and sometimes the teacher is like, I just have to learn patience and tolerance, so it's the teaching me to look within at the things that I'm not doing well. You know, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that person. It's just my reaction to them is the lesson I need to concentrate on. I hate those lessons, but they crop up regularly, go figure. So this person adds, this is really helpful advice. How do you suggest managing feelings of loneliness and the feeling that everybody's in a relationship? I definitely experience these thoughts less in recovery, but they do creep up on me.
Yeah, well, see, one of the things I liked about Patrick Carnes was books and things. Well, he called it the gentle path, you know, and so managing feelings of loneliness, I just think you have to be gentle with yourself and give yourself some space. And, you know, this idea that everybody's in a relationship, well, everybody is in a relationship in some way with somebody or something, you know.
But that doesn't mean a relationship, a paired, bonded relationship. So.
Right, but you're in a relationship, you know, it's like people talk about higher power, for example, and I like the one definition of a higher power is everybody has a higher power if you consider your higher power is what your life revolves around. So for some people, cocaine might be your higher power if your life revolves around cocaine. And so, you know, you could have your kids could be your higher power, or you know, your addiction could be your higher power, or a person, your mom could be your higher power, or your boyfriend could be your higher power. And it's just a way to be with some of these concepts in terms of who do I want to be, and how maybe am I, you know, and am I caught up in some kind of addictive prison or something? How can I free myself to be able to make some more conscious choices? You know, that's the kind of thing I'm getting at. So managing feelings of loneliness, a lot of that is, you know, might I get to actually, and can I learn how to live and enjoy my own company? Because if you can't learn how to be and enjoy your own company, you're not going to be very good in a relationship, because you'll be so needy. Like, I can't spend an evening alone. I'll just feel so lonely. And so it's like, okay, so I'm alone tonight. How can I design that? First thing I always noticed in a relationship is after I got this person, the next thing I knew is, they come there around all the time. So it's sort of like, I need my space. And either way, you know, sometimes you want to have the closeness and sometimes you need to be by yourself, but learning to be okay with your own company. That's a really great quality to have. It's worth taking the time to just listen to whatever music or read a book, or allow yourself to explore something in nature, or there's a difference between loneliness and solitude. And I think this is about, could I let myself experience solitude and have some peace within that? That's an invitation.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying, and one of the things that for me in addiction is, you know, it's like the always and nevers, and it's like the feeling that everybody else is in a relationship, and it's been really helpful for me to learn to understand that that isn't the case, and that, like, okay, I mean, I asked myself, what is the reality? Is everybody in a relationship? No. Okay. You know, I mean, they're in relationship with other things, but I think you're talking about a paired relationship. Yeah. So, and the loneliness, I love what you're saying, Sharon, because like it's really was a learning process for me to learn to be comfortable by myself. First thing I do when I came in the house is turn on the TV or whatever, all this distraction stuff. And I have learned, and it has taken time to learn to be okay in solitude, you know, from that standpoint. The other thing, and I am a spiritual person, one of the things that somebody told me, in fact, I'm sure I still have it, early in recovery, it was like a letter from God, and I'm preparing you for another person as I'm preparing that other person for you. And just having that thought that like I'm in preparation stage, I'm not ready right now. And so like I have to do these things. I have to take these steps in order to be ready for whatever relationship is coming. And that was really helpful for me, of just taking away the anxiety about, you know, like now. And one other thing we thought about is the best thing for me if I'm feeling lonely, or worse, feeling sorry for myself. That's a really bad place for me to go. If I'm feeling sorry for myself or lonely, the best thing for me to do is go reach out to someone else. And I can pick up the phone and call somebody that, you know, might not be getting as many phone calls. And it might be just like, hey, just thinking about you, whatever. It might be I go do some service work. I go help out at something. There's lots of organizations that need, you know, support and volunteers and whatever, you know, whatever it is. If you're in a 12-step program, like I was at my meeting the other day and they're like looking for volunteers to go put the, you know, the phone directories together. Well, you know what, there's going to be other people. It'd be social, you know, so, there's lots of ways that are healthier choices for me. The other thing that I do is like, I'll go for a walk. As soon as I get outside, that's a helpful healing thing for me. I'll go for a walk, I'll go for a hike, I'll go for a run. If I go outside, then I'm looking at the world in a different lens than if I'm just sitting inside my house going, you know, it's just me. So there's practical things you can do, but I would invite you to experience this of like, this is, I'm in the in-between. It's like, I'm getting ready and it's going to be an exciting new chapter, but believing that there is somebody for you that, you know, that is also being prepared for you.
Yeah. And also not being afraid to go and do some things on your own. Like I used to think that the only way I would ever get flowers was somebody who had to buy them for me. And I remember the moment that I bought myself some flowers in the grocery store. But I can't tell you how I was raised that flowers was this thing that somebody else was supposed to get for you. It was just this kind of blindness that I had. And the same thing about going on a trip. So I started going on some organized trip that had a really great guide, and there were other people there, and I ended up having a great time. And the last time I went on a trip, because I thought I had to go with a guy, and we fought the entire time. And you know, and so it was I met some really interesting people. Many of them were other women, but guess what? They were interesting people. And if I just wasn't involved with, I have to meet somebody to fit this criteria, I could be living my life and having interesting experiences with a number of people, old, young, black, white, in between, you know, different cultures, learning about stuff in the meantime. So it's about really being open to life. And when you are, people tend to be attracted to, you know, the energy that you have, because you're just sort of more open to being with whoever might show up. And remember, we're all imperfect. You know, I love the affirmation, I'm imperfect and worthwhile.
Yeah.
And potential partners, there's always going to be at least something about them. I always say everybody you meet has at least one fatal flaw, and the success to a good relationship is being able to find some way to tolerate that fatal flaw. And a fatal flaw might be, I had one friend of mine and she just would never go out with anybody who ever was an alcoholic, because her father was alcoholic. And even though the guy had 20 years recovery, she was, you know, and so she was probably missing some really good people. But other person might say, yeah, you know, if they have some years recovery, you know, that's not a disqualification necessarily. So
I personally think they're actively working on themselves. I'll take that any day over somebody who is just settled for where they're at.
Or a short guy, or a person of a certain age, or whatever else you have. So it's sort of like whatever their fatal flaw is. That's why I think, you know, we always want people to accept us, warts and all. So this is about allowing yourself to see is, you know, can I be open to, maybe there's some other good parts there, and can I find a way to tolerate this, or talk about it and see if there's a way to manage it better. So I personally am a great believer in also just having a sense of humor about yourself as we all go through all of this.
I agree. Some of what could be perceived as my most embarrassing, humiliating, awful stories are truly, they're the ones that get the biggest laughs when I share them, because I think because it's relatable on some level, you just go, oh gosh, I can totally imagine that.
Yeah.
So I've just learned to, not take myself so darn seriously, and it's very freeing. So.
Yeah.
So I think we're almost out of time, and I think we'll wrap up there. So thank you so much, Sharon, for joining us tonight. Thank you all for the questions and comments. We appreciate it. Dr. Robbins should be back next week. He and I are both on the road, so we may be doing it from the road. But we appreciate you being here. There's lots of drop-in groups. For those of you who have not participated in those yet, I invite you to do that. There are drop-in groups for betrayed partners, for male betrayed partners, for female sex and love addicts, for sex and love addicts, a gay men's group, and then there's a number of webinars. Troy Love is doing the webinar on Wednesday morning with me. He's doing it, I'm supporting him, let's put it that way. And there's Prodependence. There's lots of great content on here that we invite you to engage with, all free. And the Sex, Love, and Addiction podcast series is great if you haven't engaged with that yet. Excellent guest hosts on that series, and people really are liking it. It's doing very well. So I think that's all for tonight. But thank you again, Sharon. So appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was fun being with you on this.
All right.
And thank you to all the people out there who were willing to come and join us and give up your time and energy to do this. And thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.